The last messenger of Stalingrad, winter of 1942. In November 1942, the cold of the Russian steppe had already settled in with deadly intensity. Stalingrad was no longer a city, it was a continuous war zone of smoke and ruins. Among the shattered buildings, a young German soldier named Erich Müller, 24 years old, thin, with tired eyes, was assigned as a messenger, the most dangerous role he could have at that moment. He did not command troops or carry heavy weapons, but he carried vital information from one bunker to another, running through devastated ground under crossfire. Every message could determine the fate of hundreds of men. Meanwhile, on the Soviet side, a young nurse named Anastasia Petrova, 19, newly graduated in medicine, cared for the wounded in an improvised hospital beneath a bombed-out building. Anastasia knew every body, every labored breath, and quickly learned that war was not about grand strategies. It was about survival, pain, and humanity. Preparation and tension. Before that fateful crossing, Erich had spent weeks in a cycle of darkness and constant fear. The makeshift quarters were nothing more than a basement of bombed buildings, with rats running through the rubble and ice forming along cracked walls. At night, he reviewed torn maps by candlelight, trying to memorize routes that could save or condemn lives. Every movement outside shelter was a gamble with death. He remembered the last letter he had delivered months earlier, an order that resulted in the deaths of dozens of soldiers who, by mistake, advanced straight into a Soviet ambush. That silent guilt followed him, and every message he carried now bore the weight of many lives. Meanwhile, Anastasia faced a different kind of war. The underground hospital was always overcrowded, with patients from both sides: burns, amputations, fever, and hunger. She learned to read bodies more than faces, recognizing signs of shock, hypothermia, and imminent death. Every decision she made could mean life or death, and she began to feel that the war was not just political or territorial. It was a test of empathy and humanity. The night before the crossing, on the eve of Erich's crossing, the Russian winter dropped to nearly -30 degrees Celsius. Snow made it impossible to distinguish the streets from rubble, and the wind carried the smell of gunpowder, blood, and burned wood. Erich wrote a note to his family, one they would likely never receive, briefly describing how much he missed life before the war. Quiet Sundays, the smell of fresh bread, his sister's laughter. He folded the paper, placed it in his backpack, and took a deep breath, trying to summon courage. On the other side of the city, Anastasia closed her eyes for a few seconds between improvised surgeries, listening to the crackle of wood burning in the hospital stoves. She knew that every soldier who left that room alive was a fragile victory, and every death, a wound in her soul. She began writing in her diary, describing faces, stories, and small words that revealed hope even in destruction. A soldier whispered that he wanted to go home. I promised I would remember him. I can't cry anymore, or I stop functioning. The day that changed everything. December 12th, 1942. Erich received an order to cross what had once been a main street, now nothing but debris and craters. The captain warned him. The Soviet position had advanced. Many messengers before him had not returned. He pressed the letter against his chest, numbers indicating reinforcements in the strategic withdrawal of an entire division. Every step was measured, every sound could be his last. At that same moment, Anastasia was treating a captured German soldier. He was frozen, bleeding, and she had to decide, treat him or prioritize Soviet wounded. Her conscience weighed heavily. Treating him meant risk to her team. Not treating him meant condemning another human being. She chose to take the risk. She placed her cold hand on his face, speaking words he barely understood, but filled with humanity amid the chaos. The crossing. As Erich began his crossing, he crouched behind every ruin, trying to move silently. Snow cracked under his boots, betraying his presence, and every shadow seemed to carry certain death. He passed frozen bodies, some still holding weapons, others simply fallen, victims of cold or artillery. With every meter, the tension grew. One misstep could mean instant death. He encountered a girl, about 12 years old, hiding in a half-destroyed building, trembling and crying. For a moment, Eric considered helping her, but realized time would not allow it. He handed her a piece of bread from his pack and gave her a look meant to offer reassurance. The girl nodded, eyes filled with tears. A small moment of humanity in the chaos. Meanwhile, Anastasia found a group of Soviet soldiers too weak to speak. She improvised camouflage using torn blankets and snow to hide them from nearby German patrols. One of them held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting us." The words echoed in her mind, reminding her that war was also made of invisible acts of courage. The collision of destinies. When Eric finally reached a partially destroyed bridge, he saw Anastasia helping the wounded across the debris. They looked at each other, breathing through the cutting cold. He hesitated. He knew she could be the enemy, yet recognized something familiar, a silent determination he carried himself. He moved forward carefully, and for a few seconds, their eyes met. No words exchanged. In that moment, the war seemed like a distant backdrop. Two young people, exhausted and terrified, met in a city reduced to rubble. For a brief instant, humanity spoke louder than politics, hatred, or fear. Eric delivered the commander's letter, securing the withdrawal of hundreds of soldiers. Anastasia continued saving lives, unaware that the messenger had directly altered the fate of many of her patients. The lasting impact months later, with the surrender at Stalingrad, Eric and Anastasia were still alive, but forever changed. Eric carried the memory of every body he stepped over, every decision that could not be undone. Anastasia recorded the names of those who survived, knowing the war had transformed everyone involved, but had also revealed a human capacity for resilience, compassion, and courage that no map or military command could capture. What they learned was this: the story of World War II is not only political or strategic, it is deeply human. Every letter delivered, every wounded soldier saved, every silent act of courage was an invisible thread holding life together in that chaos. Stalingrad was not just a battlefield, it was a mirror of humanity, where small individual decisions shaped the fate of thousands. And even among destroyed cities and frozen bodies, the thread of empathy could still be found, shining through quiet, courageous acts. Post-war, the silence after the fire. The day the war ended for Eric and Anastasia did not bring immediate relief. Stalingrad, now consumed by silence, was a landscape of ruins and painful memories. Every corner recalled explosions. Every collapsed building held bodies no one would ever find. Eric walked the streets with heavy steps, feeling the weight of everything he had survived. Every fallen comrade returned to his mind without warning, every decision made during the war echoing in his subconscious. He struggled to find meaning in his survival. What did it mean to live when so many friends, comrades, and civilians had died? Every letter delivered had saved lives, but had also condemned him to carry silent guilt. Anastasia returned to her partially rebuilt hospital. The building was safer now, but the smell of blood, gunpowder, and burned wood lingered in her memory. Every action she performed carried the memory of those who died in her arms and those who never had a chance. She realized her life would never be the same. The war had taught her resilience, but left invisible scars. Rebuilding humanity. Eric and Anastasia did not meet again immediately after the war, but each in their own way tried to rebuild a sense of humanity. Eric began working on reconstruction, buildings and bridges, helping restore what the war had destroyed. Each brick he placed felt like a small act of redemption. Anastasia became a respected medical figure, training new nurses and caring for survivors with quiet patience. She carried her diary, revisiting every name, every story. Writing became her therapy, a way to preserve those the war had nearly erased. The meeting war had interrupted years later. During a harsh winter, Eric visited a newly rebuilt hospital for infrastructure work. Their eyes met again. Anastasia had not changed much, the same strength and determination, now tempered by experience. For a moment, the world around them faded. They recognized each other, not as enemies, but as survivors connected by an invisible thread of humanity. Without words, Anastasia pointed to her diary. Eric gave a faint smile. No explanation was needed. They both understood. Every silent act of courage in Stalingrad had mattered. Memories that never fade. Even with reconstruction, the war never fully left them. Eric sometimes woke in the night, reliving the frozen crossing, the children in ruined buildings, the bodies left behind. Anastasia, in quiet moments, remembered every cold hand she had held, every life balanced on the edge. But they had learned something essential. Even in horror, the value of empathy, courage, and humanity remains absolute. Epilogue. Humanity preserved. Decades later, as Stalingrad became a rebuilt city, Eric and Anastasia still met occasionally. They spoke little of details, but every meeting carried silent respect and gratitude. Their story was never written in history books or carved into monuments, but it endured, quiet, invisible, like a thread connecting generations. A reminder that even in war, humanity survives through courage, compassion, and small acts of kindness.